Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ashley Davis, and I am the Senior Editor Fashion at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series, sponsored by Jewelers of America. Today's session is hosted by our Editor-in-Chief, Michelle Graff, and features Chris Casey and Edahn Golan, co-founders of Tenoris. Before I turn it over to Michelle to get the webinar started, I want to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can type it into the Zoom Q&A box. I will be back on at the end of the discussion to share the questions. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website on Monday, September 12th. Now I'll turn it over to Michelle and her guests, and I'll be back to field any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Ashley. Edahn, Chris, thank you two so much for joining us today. I think most of our listeners today know who you are, but those who might be new to the industry, can you please introduce yourselves?
Chris, you want to go first?
Sure. I joined the jewelry industry, I think in 2005, had many years of enjoyable time working with Michelle at National Jeweler magazine, and ended up running the Nielsen Jewelry Group at the time, which was National Jeweler, Europa Star magazine, Couture show, JA shows, and a couple of other miscellaneous things. More directly relevant, after leaving Nielsen, I joined NPD, where Edahn and I developed for NPD a diamond retail measurement service, and where we learned firsthand about what this is all about, the needs and maybe not needs in the market that don't need to be addressed. And for the last couple of years, I've been working with Edahn to develop this product.
Okay, Edahn.
I've been around the diamond industry since 2001. First at IDEX as editor-in-chief, and later on I kind of stumbled onto research, left in 2013 to start my own company. NPD, as Chris mentioned, was one of my clients, one of my better clients. We had a lot of fun there for 4 years until they decided that they're not going to continue with the diamond project. At which point, Chris and I had a discussion one very cold and rainy November in New York City, and we said, "Hey, we can do this on our own." And here we are, 3 years later. We have this service called Tenoris, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Okay, so that's what we're here today to talk about, Tenoris. So can you give us a little background on the company? Edahn, you just kind of shared how it got started, but what is the genesis of Tenoris more broadly, and how did you come up with the name? Where did the name kind of originate from? You and Chris talked about this.
Chris came up with the name because he's the educated guy between the two of us. But see, if it was me, it'd be in Hebrew, right? Ancient Hebrew, right? But so Chris will tell about the name, but the idea was, so for years, I'm doing, all this analysis of the diamond and jewelry industry. And
Edahn, for people who don't know, you also do analysis for our State of the Majors issue annually,
yes.
$100 million super sellers.
Yes, and I enjoy it very much. It's a challenge, but it's very, very interesting. So, but the idea is that at the end of the day, that when, an NPD really working with NPD really fleshed it out. The type of data that's available to the diamond industry and the jewelry industry, which are kind of separate in a way, is pitiful. It's not a transparent market, not because people don't want to share, they don't know how to share. There wasn't any body, the organization that kind of took it upon itself to go and do a lot of research that made it available. It was kind of small niches. And one of the things that, when you talk with diamond traders around the world, when I talk with diamond traders around the world, is they have a kind of an understanding of what's being sold at retail, but not really. And in that regard, having a body that actually, a company that actually goes out there, collects it in a, with a very clear methodology, cleans the data, gives, it's kind of a cliche today, but provides a big data sort of analysis of the industry, just became, so obvious that it's needed that, was practically a no-brainer.
I mean, and data is driving everything today, right? Everybody wants data to make their decisions. I mean, as it should be. Everyone wants data to make their decisions. Chris, let's talk a little bit about.
So happy.
What's that?
And that makes me so happy.
Yeah, I know, right? It's a good position to be in when you're an independent industry analyst, right, Edahn?
Yes.
Chris, where'd the name come from? Since Edahn's pinned that on you.
Yeah, he threw it at me. That's fine. Like many things related to Tenoris. So we did wrestle typically with the combination of our children's initials and kind of a combination of Vermont and Tel Aviv. So nothing came up. So Tenoris, it actually means trend in Latin, or one of the meanings of Tenoris is trend in Latin. And the idea is that what we do, and Edahn mentioned kind of the anecdotal, informal communication through the marketplace, which actually is pretty efficient. It's just slow. We very slowly understand the trends that are going on in a relatively slow industry. The need, and we did learn this at NPD, is to go out there, and the market is interested in understanding what happens at retail, not anecdotal, not call up and ask for retailers how they're doing, but real meaningful data about it. So our goal is to really formalize and structuralize that information flow from the retail counter back to the supply side. Because the more we can align supply and retail, the more efficient the supply side can be, the more full of the correct product the retail side can be. And
that's very important. And that's
it is. And we just as an old.
It's a space where retailers fall down sometimes. They don't have their best sellers in stock.
Absolutely. So this is a service that works in both directions. It helps retailers understand what their collective compatriot set is doing. And it helps align the suppliers to make sure they're manufacturing and selling products that consumers really want to buy. So that's our trend. If we can speed the communication that from this very informal 6 to 9 months to 1 to 2 to 3 months, we make the industry that much more efficient.
Yeah, very good point. So I want to talk a little bit more about this kind of, getting data to the industry, because I think that there is, from my standpoint, as a provider of content information, I think there's some confusion out there because there's a couple different entities coming in with data reports. We have information that comes in from MasterCard that has said recently that jewelry sales are up 21% year over year. And that doesn't seem to be the case. That doesn't align with your data. That doesn't align with, and then we have data that also great data that comes in from the Edge that we report on with Sherry Smith in her column on data. So that's one set of data. And then there's also the government data, the BEA data that comes in. And as Chris, you kind of alluded to this, I think there's a lag in that getting updated. It's not very timely. So can you explain a little bit, what exactly are you reporting on at Tenoris? The way I read it and read your releases, you say specialty jewelers. So to me, this is everyone, like a Tiffany, like Signet and all their stores, everyone that is in the business specifically of selling fine jewelry. Is this a correct understanding? And we're talking everyone from the mom and pops to the biggest chains.
Kind of. So we're collecting data that comes from 1,200. No, you weren't very far off the mark. We're collecting data from about 1,200 doors and across the United States, from small mom and pop, so a single store kind of company, to those that have they're a small chain, and they are what's important about this panel is that it's statistically representative. So we have more stores in bigger cities. We have less stores, in the middle of Nebraska. They are a whole range of, low, average price point to, companies that sell in upwards from $15 million a year per store. So that's who they are. We do not have the large Signet's Tiffany of the market. But nonetheless, we have a very good understanding of what's happening in the market.
So,
So you mentioned the MasterCard data. So one of the things that we can clearly say is that our data represents specialty jewelers, with a
and
slight notch to the
just to
higher
clarify
end.
for everyone, when you say specialty jewelers, you mean people that specialize in selling fine jewelry. So not talking about Macy's, we're not talking about Sam's Club, we're not talking about other people that buy jewelry at places that sell a lot of other products, department stores, warehouse clubs, etc. We're talking specifically about your Tiffany's, your independents, like people that just sell fine jewelry.
Absolutely, and they're defined in two ways. One way is what is it that they're selling? So usually they sell about 80% of their income, 70 to 80% of their income is from selling jewelry. Another way of representing them is when they talk with the government and the government asks them, so what kind of business are you? They say about themselves that they are a jewelry store. So, there's, if you look at public companies, when they're asked what kind of business they are, they'll say, such as Signet, they'll say, we're a specialty jeweler.
So just to be clear, your data does not include the big players, the Signets, Tiffany, Benbridge, I guess. What is kind of your upper bound of your biggest store you're tracking? How many stores would they have? 8, 10? Or are we talking, do you go up to chains that have like 50, 60?
Chris, do you remember that number off the top of your head?
Sure. Well, a couple of things about it. So one, these stores come in, but we also can filter these stores. So they're all specialty jewelers. The largest chain is probably under 50. So these are not big operators. But I think the key element is that one, they're all specialty jewelers, and we have the ability to filter. So if somebody wants to look at the true independent specialty jeweler, which again is a pretty nebulous definition, it can be under 15 doors, it could be under 10 doors, it could be under 5 doors. We're able to identify all those people. So to kind of summarize it, the vast majority of our data serves the independent specialty jewelry, or reflects the independent specialty jeweler market. We have additional data that can be used for various purposes that goes beyond that into stores, into chains that can be between the 10 and 50 category, but that is a minority of our data. So I think the safest way to think of it is what we do is we provide a very deep dive and a very accurate dive into the day-to-day sales life of independent specialty jewelers in our marketplace, excluding big box, excludes department stores, excludes large chains. So we have taken on, and the reason we took it on, it is the most highly fragmented piece of the market, and it's the hardest piece of the market that to get meaningful insight about what they're doing collectively.
Yeah, I would like to add maybe 2 things to this. So one thing is, so when we collect data, we collect everything that has to do with the jewelry business of these guys. So we're looking at what they bought, who they bought it from, for how much, when they bought it. We're looking at what they sold, when they sold it, and for how much. We have the characteristics of the items that they purchase. So if it's a diamond, we know the colors, color and clarity. If it's a jewelry item, we know usually, I mean, here and there some data is missing, but by and large, we know, so what metal it is, the purity, etc. And by combining all of these together, we can understand a lot of other things, such as turn, margin, etc. Build up in inventory. So if you are a jeweler, you're a jewelry manufacturer, and one of your biggest concerns that at the end of the season, when the season is over, retailers will turn back to you and say, okay, all of these goods didn't sell, we're giving it back to you, and they need to stick their hand in the pocket, pay back for what they have, what was returned, and then take the jewelry apart. So diamonds will break in the process, gold will be lost in the process. It's horrible from a jewelry manufacturing perspective. It's a horrible, piece of their business. Instead, we can say to them, look, when you are talking with jewelry retailers, and they say to you, we want from you for this coming season, a ring of these characteristics, and we want it delivered by these dates, you can turn to them and say, look, you really want white gold here, But I'm looking at this data from Tenoris. It says there that white gold isn't selling as well as it did. On the other hand, we're seeing a shortage in yellow gold. How about we switch this around? So everybody benefits. The jeweler benefits because they have better fitting to the market. The jewelry manufacturer benefits because they have a less return goods. And so from a financial perspective, everybody wins. So that's one of the biggest.
The jewelers have the jewelers have the merchandise they need, and the manufacturers aren't having to buy back as much unsold product.
Absolutely.
That's the idea. I know everyone wants to talk about the data, and when I say the data, I mean lab-grown diamonds specifically. I know everyone wants to hear about that, but I'm going to ask 2 more questions about the data, and then we'll move on to some kind of trend specifics. So how much can you tell listeners today about your methods for data collection?
Do you want me to? I'll take a crack.
Sure,
So our data is a direct export from the point of sale system of retailers. And these are all opted in retailers. So this is information they have agreed to share. It is done automatically from an export directly from the system, untouched, comes straight to us. So it is not phone surveys, it is nothing. And as Edahn mentioned, we get every transaction that they've done, everything they've purchased, everything that they've sold, everything that resides in inventory. And once a month we get this information. Next stage is, what do we do with that information? We've got these 1,200 doors that are coming in, and this might be shocking, but they don't all record the same, they don't all use the same language to record the characteristics of a diamond or of a piece of jewelry. They all have their own unique language. So what we do is we normalize that language. Some are easy. You know, one retailer A may say that it's a G/SI1. But from a database, that's very different than a G-SI1 or GSI1. So we just normalize that into 2 data fields. There's color G, there's clarity SI1. So that now becomes a usable database. The other thing is we search a tougher one. Michelle, you mentioned lab grown. I think we have about 16 different routines that look for indication of lab grown. The simplest was a retailer indicates in an item description, lab grown. It could be that there's no indication at all, but the grading report identification number has an indication that it's lab grown. It could be that there's no indication, but we know that there are vendors that are 100% lab grown people. So we take that data and we analyze it, again, without touching it, we modify it, and we extract certain kind of collective perspectives, lab grown being one of them. There are 16 different ways they say it's lab grown. We've identified those 16. The end result in the database is this is a lab grown product. Same thing with category, different people, engagement rings has a number of different ways that it's identified in a retailer's point of sale system. We just standardize that. So all we do is take data, we take raw data, we normalize it, and we put it into a database. And then we lay on top of it a user interface to access that database. And that is the very simple way of describing what we do with data.
And then, Edahn, using your years of experience as an analyst and as a journalist, you then also turn it into content and kind of hash it out for people. This is what I saw. This is what we think it means, et cetera, et cetera. And so once you get the data, what do you do with it exactly? Are you selling it to manufacturers, or the retailers paying you as well?
So our service is a subscription-based service. That basically means that we give, everything is online, right? So to be a little nerdy about it, we take the data as Chris described, we clean it, we put it through a business intelligence software that kind of makes it colorful and generates a bunch of reports automatically. And if you want, I'll be more than happy to show you what it looks like. But basically, our clients are subscribers. They pay a monthly fee that gives them access to the data. The data is downloaded at the beginning of every month. And once it's cleaned and prepped, it's uploaded into our BI, our business intelligence service. That's why our URL is tenoris.bi. because I didn't want just the .com. I wanted something with some business intelligence. So it's uploaded into our system, and our clients have access. They just log in whenever they want. They can do, they can look at the data as we present it. They can change the way it is presented. So instead of looking at the entire market, they can look only at lab grown, only at gold, only, and do a series of combinations. And I'm, again, as I said, I'm happy to do a quick demonstration if wanted. And then when they look at the results, they can say, okay, this looks great. So, and then they can just download literally all of the figures and put it either into their own system, compare it to their own data, create whatever reports or visuals that they want for their own internal use, share it with marketing, share it with management, you know, as they see fit.
Okay, do you want to go ahead before we get into specifics of what you saw for the month of July? Do you want to go ahead with that demo?
Sure. So, you know, last time we spoke, we had Peter Smith. So you mentioned Sherry. So we had Peter Smith on and Sherry. And one of the questions that we discussed was lab grown. So let's see, pardon, we didn't talk about lab grown. We talked about engagement rings. So this is our system. And what I want to do is take a look. This is our jewelry system. And we can look here at a variety of components. And what I want to do is take a look at what happened this year with, so we discussed engagement rings. So let's pull up engagement rings. So we have a category for rings and a subcategory for engagement rings. And we see that the average price of an engagement ring this year was $4,127. Here's the caveat: at specialty jewelers, right? So if they go to Walmart, it costs obviously a lot less. And if they go to Tiffany, it costs a lot more. But this is the average as presented by as done by our panel.
So wait, and this is just to be, sorry, Don, just to be clear, this is the average then at the independents you are tracking. So this does not include Tiffany, Signet, the majors, and this does not include Macy's, Costco, the kind of department stores, wholesale clubs. This is the independents you are tracking. And we talked a little bit before we got on today that you saw a story about engagement ring prices on another news site. And was it higher or lower than this? Do you recall?
No, I do not. But so the question is, so this, you know, so let's say you're a jewelry manufacturer and you say, okay, this is a good number. Well, what do I do with that? So first of all, they know what's not only what is the average price, but they also know what is the average cost. They can understand it. But they say, you know, but I'm you know, in a specific area. I only provide diamond jewelry. So, you know, diamond jewelry, the price goes up a little bit. Diamonds are very dominant. That's why there was the big change. But then they say, you know what, but I'm not just diamonds. I'm a lab grown kind of diamond. So you see, so everything on this page adjusts to that automatically. We see that the average price here for in this year was $39.20. And rising. You see, so the amount. This is unit sell history. So we see that constantly 2020, 2021, and 2022, there's a constant increase in the number of such engagement rings that were sold. Here's the sad news for the diamond industry. This is what happens for natural diamond.
Interesting.
Of course, the average price is much higher, but the gross margins are different. So there's plenty that you can learn from this. If you're more interested in a particular area, a certain price point, if you want to know branding, what are the kind of diamonds that are usually used? So this is for natural. It's a HSI1 is the hotspot. This is where 16% of purchases go. With lab grown, we see that it's, well, we have an outlier. This is the sweet spot right over here. So it's VS, FG, so a slightly higher color clarity combination. Of course, if you want to understand shapes, asset, memo, all of that is easily accessible to a jewelry manufacturer, a diamond company, a wholesaler, a mining company. All of these guys, of course, financial firms are very interested in this. Those are tracking, the public companies in the industry. All of these guys are very interested in this sort of data.
Really interesting. So can you tell us a little bit, do you know what this outlier is here?
No, I just popped in.
Actually, no, I'm going to interrupt. We actually do. So when things like this pop up, we'll go back and we'll say, why is this happening? Why do we have this weird KSI1 engagement ring? Sometimes it's data, it's a retailer made a typo, which sometimes happens. But in this case, we could go back and in fact, there's a supplier that launched a line in July of last year. And it was very specific because it didn't exist. And then all of a sudden it existed. It's been fairly well adopted. It's a very low price point, lab grown line, again, with a KSI1. It's completely outside of the normal, but the data supports it. The vendor is constant. And it's one of the nuances that you can pick up from this kind of data. It's there, we report it because it happened, but specifically it started in July of last year by a single supplier.
Yes.
Okay.
So when I say outlier, I don't mean it's a mistake. It means they're just out of the norm.
It's
But
not
yeah,
representative of what's really going on in the broader market.
No.
Yep.
Um,
Other things, so just, so we can track who are the best performers in this specific area in this period. And we just flush it out. So this was a request from one of our clients. We can compare directly lab grown against natural. We can provide data on inventory. We've been tracking inventory only since the start of the year. So we have it here. Suppliers, penetration, et cetera. So it's a fairly, I would dare to say, a fairly robust system with a very granular data set that is, there are two things that we're not providing our clients. The name of the retailer, we ourselves don't know who they are. And we don't know
you're just pulling data from POS systems anonymously.
Well, we
it's
have
not
an
coming with
intermediate,
the name.
there are intermediate companies that are pulling it for us, and part of the agreement with the retailers is that they're not disclosed in any way. So it has there's several different aspects to it, but the bottom line is that you cannot find their name or guess who they are by doing a certain combination of selects. And so we promise them anonymity to protect their business. And we do not have full data on the buyers. We know in general kind of who they are, but this is auxiliary. We know where they are, we know, et cetera.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit, unless there's something else, Edahn, you'd like to show here.
Besides my kids, no.
So I want to talk a little bit about, because what you are is you're tracking trends. You're not just providing data, but you're also analyzing those trends and saying, this is what we're seeing. The sales of this category are rising, sales of this category are falling, et cetera, which is really important to put it in context. Let's talk about general industry trends. Now, you stated in your market comments for August that specialty jeweler sales cooled down in July, but that it was not yet a trend. So can we talk a little bit about what you think happened in July? And also for you, when does it become a trend?
Well, so we saw a decline in sales start in May. So May, June, July. So 3 months is kind of a trend already. But I wanted to go on the cautious side. We can say now in August that we are seeing decline in sales.
But
I don't care at
just
all
to put
what
it,
MasterCard's spending pulse was going to say in a few days. If
but
they
just
say
to
that
put
there
it in
is
perspective, this is a decline from a peak a very robust period of sales for the industry.
Absolutely. And if you want, I can show you the graph in our system. But the bottom line is this. Jewelry sales in general are first, so specialty jewelers represent about 50% of the market. So when we talk about this data, it's very representative. We have seen a decline in diamond jewelry sales all the way down to 2019, while a rise in total jewelry sales. So people were buying less diamonds, lower price points, average price points. And then 2020 hit and people are sitting at home and they're saying to themselves, well, you know, I have this travel money set aside and there's no travel in sight. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? Okay, so I didn't sign up to Spotify. I didn't sign up to, you know, Netflix yet. Got that out of the way. Now what else am I gonna do with the money? It's like, well, let's buy jewelry. And that's what a lot of people did. They bought jewelry and it ended up the year. So according to the BEA figures, sales were up 50% year over year in 2021. So to 94 point something billion dollars. So
wait, in
here's what
2020 or 2021?
In 2021.
Okay.
So there was a rise. So beginning of the year, that was very slow, right? So February sales were down. March and April were kind of non-existent. There was sort of a pickup in May, and then in June, July, we saw a rise. And in July, August is when polished diamond prices started to rise as well. So what we saw was two things. One, people started to spend money because they had nothing else to do. And two, that engagements and weddings were postponed. So today, you know, an engagement isn't, you know, what I did with my wife. We sat quietly at home and I said, oh, you know, will you marry me? In a semi-romantic sort of situation. Today, it's a big, you know, production. You know, we have drones, we have camera people, we have the family hiding behind the bushes, the friends hiding behind the corner. And then, you know, you pop the question and everybody descends on you and yada, yada, yada. You can't do that with social distancing. So all of that was postponed until 2021, when all of a sudden, you know, we have 2 years of weddings, you know, mashed into one. And so that's, you know, so bridal, which is, you know, 50% of the diamond sales in the United States, you know, so that pushed up sales. So a decline this year just makes perfect sense because it's behind us, let's be honest. The question is, what's going to happen with a recession? Will we have a recession? How big, how deep the recession will be, if we'll suffer from a recession? And of course, you know, times like that, we tend to be careful with our spending. So a decline makes perfect sense.
Can I interject real quick with a question before we get deeper into this? When we're looking, and Chris, I'd like your perspective on this too. When we're looking at this kind of slowdown in sales of jewelry, diamond jewelry specifically, following this kind of peak, do you attribute that solely to people are traveling again and now their money is redirected, or do you think there are multiple factors at play?
Well, as with anything, there are always multiple factors. But again, semantically, at what I would call, what we see now is happening is a reversion to the mean, right? So we're declining, right? It's a correction. We're getting back to the historic levels of the marketplace, to your point, down from the 2021. To support Edahn's perspective, it clearly bridal is a category that has declined more rapidly than other categories, and engagement rings in particular. So the front end of the bridal segment in specific has declined more. So we're seeing clear evidence that the wedding boom of last year has ebbed. The engagement ring decline would tell us that we should probably expect that the rest of the bridal category will decline for the next couple of months, because you know, we don't know yet the timing between these purchases, or they never know the timing between the purchases. So again, we're reverting to the mean here from a very high year, and we're getting back to normal. We hope to do some analysis to 2019 to get some pre-pandemic, because again, we're trending. We started in January 2020, where we had a pandemic 6 months, then we had a boom 6 months, then we had a boom year. So there's nothing normal about the 2 years that we've looked back. This is kind of our first normal. So again, there are segments. Other segments that we look at, One of the things we stress is there are different markets out there. The market of a retail price point under $500 has dropped significantly faster than the rest of the market. The price point from 2,500 to 10,000 is relatively flat, and the price point over 50,000 continues to boom. So it's never easy to just say, here's the whole market, it did this. So if I'm a high-end retailer and I've been having a great year of selling $100,000 items, we haven't seen any slowdown of what's happening in that marketplace. On the other hand, if you're a retailer with an average transaction value of under $500, you're probably feeling this a lot more. So it's never easy. Yes, there's a market number. Our reality is that we have a number of sub-markets by either category bridal or by price point budget that all act independently from one another. They add up to be a whole, but without looking at the components, it's very hard to understand the big number.
So Chris, do you think that those that decline in the sales of lower price point jewelry has to do with the fact that those customers were hit harder by inflation, the rising price of gas, the rising price of food, whereas people on the other end of the market don't feel that as acutely because they're
absolutely right, and that discretionary spend, those people, that goes away. So again, looking at it by sub-market, you can start building a case about what's the behavior that's happening and driving these different markets. Inflation has a bigger impact on lower income households, and they're buying the lower priced jewelry, and that is slowing down at a more rapid pace than the rest of the market. So again, reverting to the norm overall, reverting the mean under 500 is probably more than that. There's a slowdown going on here because of the inflationary pressures, period. I mean, it's happening. Yeah. But in the rest of the markets, not so much.
Yeah, Pandora also made a really interesting observation. I don't know if you two saw it in its Q2 numbers. Its Q2 US numbers were down year over year. And it pointed out that there were stimulus checks going out in 2021 at this point that put money into people's pockets. And Pandora flat out said, part of our problem was there were no stimulus checks in 2022. So we're up against this period in 2021 where people had more money in their pocket.
That's especially true for low price items such as, so the stimulus checks were what? There was a 1,500, 1,300, what was the rest? I don't remember anymore. Anyway, so I mean, this is not high-end jewelry. You're not buying high-end jewelry with this. You're buying, you're spending this on the lower cost. So yes, it makes sense that it hurts Pandora. It doesn't really reflect the rest of the market.
Do you think that as we continue to emerge from the pandemic and from this, what would the jewelry industry like, a really unexpectedly robust period of sales, do you think we're going to see more of this market kind of pulling apart the market where, the high end will just keep going and increasing and people that have money have more and more money and the low end is going to continue to suffer? Do you think the market's going to become even more fragmented in that way?
Me? I think, well, so the old truth is that the wealthy are more resilient to economic fluctuations. And even at times when we saw a decline in diamond jewelry sales, Cartier, Tiffany, all those guys, saw a rise in their sales. And it says, and it doesn't only speak for those that spend more on jewelry. It also talks about the importance of brand and quality of workmanship, positioning. What does it say about me when I buy, a certain item? So there's a lot of components to it. But I think having a strong. So one of the things that we saw at NPD was, one of the striking figures that we saw was that over time there was a shift of purchases into brands. And we saw that jewelers preferred brands. They cost them more, but they sold for more. They had a rise in inventory, and so there's a lot of benefits that could be still be enjoyed even during a downturn. So, the idea is just to understand, where exactly the market is and how to prepare for it, especially when in diamonds, the lead time is between you buy rough and you buy it for cash, right? You got to pay up front, and until it makes it to the market, so it takes 3 months to polish, and then until you sell it, and then until it's in the store, and then it sits there for a while. This lead time it can be devastating. I mean, by the time you're to the market, the market is in a different place. So those are the issues that you need to deal with in a fluctuating market.
Right. And Michelle, let me add one point to it. Back to is there going to be continuing segmentation of the marketplace? By units sold, by far, the single largest, most popular item in America is a silver chain under $100. That's what moves. That's traffic into the store. So a lot of people buy that. But again, it's indicative that volume, low price point is important to this industry in a lot of different ways. So does it go away? I don't think it goes away. Is it suppressed now because meat costs 27% more and all of these things are draining the pocket for those lower end expenditures? It's absolutely having an impact. But I don't think that that's a long-term segmentation of our market or fracturing of our market into those with stars and those that don't have stars. I mean, we are at its core, our volume is this $100 silver chain that people come in to buy, to repair, to replace, to adorn, whatever they're using it for. It's a volume low-end purchase that, again, may be cyclical based on current inflationary pressures, but I think it comes back. And it's reflective of a lot of jewelry in and around that price point.
Chris, I wanted to, before we jump, I want to leave some time with questions, but really quickly, one last question before we jump into our audience Q&A. Where do we go from here? And Chris, I think you were going to get into this before we kind of got off in this inflation tangent, but we've seen sales cool down post-pandemic, correct, go back to normal levels. Where do we go from here?
Well, so Edahn kind of touched on it. So again, if we're in a reversion to the mean now, again, it clearly declined in May, the decline accelerated in June, the decline accelerated in July. We'll be looking at August numbers tomorrow, so we'll have another indication for that. But I'm still going to categorize that into a correction back to a normal environment. The question becomes, does that continue to accelerate? Does it flatline? Where does that go? And that is the unknown. So how do we see that? Your point earlier on, when's a trend a trend? 1 month
Right.
is not a trend, but we're learning with our data, because it's so granular, that 2 months isn't a trend, but it sure as hell should be paid attention to after 2 months. And by 3 months, it's a trend. So now we're almost at that inflection point of, again, correction to a historic precedent, or from a historic peak. Or are we going to continue one way or the other? Down? It's a possibility. It still costs more to live in America than it used to. No impact on the high end. Have we flatlined the bridle? Probably. We probably absorbed that hit. It's not going to decline anymore. So we're really at a very interesting point from both supplier and from retailer, saying, I got it. If I need to get back to my 2019 levels, or even a little below, but like 2021, I'm still good. It's still a good year. But now's the time we need to look and understand that if it continues to decline, it's more than that. Then that is economic pressure that's going to cause decline. And again, it's then finding out at what price point is that having an impact on jewelry and diamond sales.
And what can you do for your business to shore up for a slowdown against sales, which is
Right.
another topic entirely. Edahn, do you want to add anything before we move on to Q&A?
One thing, the one thing I want to say about August sales is that traditionally, when you look at jewelry sales, there's a rise in August. The reason for that is that August is a time for travel and people go on vacation. And one of the odd behaviors that we all have, I can testify for myself for sure, is that we tend to spend on things and kind of, I don't want to say indiscriminately, but we're less cautious. We do a lot less price comparison when we travel. We have a feel-good mood, and this is something that will remind me of this place. So we go out and so we always see a rise in sales, especially with tourism. If it's international tourism, people land in New York, it's like, oh, Tiffany, let's go in there. So we see these lines, on Fifth Avenue. So if the August sales do not rise compared to, not year over year, but compared to July, that's a very clear indication that there is an economic issue at hand. And as Chris said, tomorrow we'll see the figures, so we'll know where it is.
Well, thank you so much. Ashley, I'm going to throw it over to you for a commercial and then just to start our Q&A.
Thank you so much, everyone, for that wonderful discussion. And thank you to our sponsor, Jewelers of America. As a reminder, you can still type questions into the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. While we compile the Q&A, I want to say a quick word about Jewelers of America. Jewelers of America is the leading trade association in the US, offering members representation, recognition, and resources to help grow their businesses and improve consumer confidence. Are you in? Become a member today for only $99. Visit jewelers.org/join to learn more. Now, let's get started with our listener questions. So firstly, how does Tenoris compare to other industry trend data companies like Big and Edge Pulse?
Chris, do you want to take that?
Sure. Again,
I'm Israeli in the group, so I'm kind of, not careful.
right, so how do we compare? In many ways, I'm going to take the easy way out. We don't compare to them. What Big and Edge do is a unique service to the marketplace, both in providing analytic service to retailers, as well as individual vendor tracking and understanding in depth into inventory and sales going on at retailers. So we don't do what they do. In fact, we see ourselves as a very much a complementary service by providing an aggregated view of the marketplace to put an individual vendor's business in perspective or an individual retailer's business in perspective. So while the data sources may be similar, the application of that data is very different. And I think, as you may have seen with Edahn's example, the granularity that we provide and the composition of jewelry, the quality of diamonds, it's just a different level of looking at the market that we feel is very much complementary to what Big and ERA provide in the marketplace.
Okay. And another question we have is, are consumers interested in Fairmined Gold? And because it's 30% more, will they pay for it?
That's an excellent question. So there are two sources of information to this. One is surveys and others is sales. In surveys, people always say, yes, I'm willing to pay more. In practice, what we're seeing is that both retailers and consumers to a certain degree are kind of hesitant. And when I say kind of hesitant, so I'm going back to what Chris mentioned about segmentation. There is a segment within the consumer market that says, I'm only going to buy something if it meets a certain criteria in terms of environmental issues, social issues, ethics, etc. And then they're saying, if that is the case, then I'm either going to pay more or I'm just not going to buy, right? Because the alternative is, so there is no one set answer to that. I can say that in diamonds, we're seeing that this is clearly something that is adopted. We see that with the war in Ukraine, that people walk into a store and say, I do not want to have Russian diamonds in my jewelry. And can you assure that? So we know that at a certain degree, this is completely accepted. To what degree, it's kind of difficult to tell.
Okay, interesting. Another question we have is, what firewalls / protection will you have in place to protect data?
Thank you,
yeah, interesting. So one of the things you're not.
We have a Doberman pincher, vicious one, standing right out there.
No, so it's a tough one. We are not the techies. Our development team is out of Israel, but in general, or as a layman's way to answer that, we exist in the Microsoft environment. So all of the data protocols that exist within anything in Azure or the tools that exist in the Microsoft world are applied to our data. Again, from a layman's perspective, they've been told to us that they are strenuous. So I'm not sure either of us can get into any more detail of it. But it certainly is a priority. It is certainly researched, and our development team has given us a solution that feels that we are as secure as you can possibly be in this world, which again, it's a scary world.
Yeah.
Mhm. And what is Tenoris's goal in terms of the total number of participating jewelers that you would like to have?
Many as possible. The more, I'll tell you what's the logic. The logic is that the more data you have, statistically, the more accurate you are. So, so that's one thing. The other thing is that the more data you have from more players in the market, the more granular the data, the more accurate it is, and the more representative it is. So, for example, having a group of larger chains is something that we would very much like to have in our system, and I hope we will have that soonish.
Okay, and that's a good segue to the next question, which is, Edahn indicated there isn't a larger chain store presence in the data. Does that mean there won't be? Or if you add larger chains to the data collection, will it be additive to existing data reports or kept unto itself?
Excellent question for Chris.
Okay. So one, it is as well. Again, we'll be transparent with our goal. There are a couple of retail channels that we think are critical. There are chains. We know from MPD that that's a very accessible data set. It fits right into our model. There is the online world that we should go after. But we started here, so we're going to start in primarily the independent channel. We will move forward. As we add those retail channels, they will be discrete environments and discrete data sets, because chain business is very different than an independent business. So the concept of the service is that a supplier that works primarily with the chains, they can subscribe to a service that really only addresses chain data. Same thing with online or a more broad-based supplier. But one of the key things that we apply to everything is a very robust filtering system. And one of those key filters will be retailer type, independent, chain, online. So to answer your question, it will always be a discrete set of retailers within in effect, a separate service.
Not to get too in the weeds.
Pardon, Michelle?
Not to get too in the weeds with the chain question, but just, I don't know if you know the answer to this yet, but do you think you're not going to obviously name the store, but would you do chain, and then give it like a range of size, like chain this size, chain this size, chain
So
50 to 80?
Actually, you're touching on the point that I wanted to comment on, and that is that we talk a lot with the market, and we ask, companies, what is it that you like to see in the data? And so you saw we had all these selects on the side of the screen that gives you the ability to filter stuff. And I mentioned, there was what's the best seller. So that was something that we got from one of the guys. So one of our goals is to provide our clients with the data that they need, not just the data that's available. We have clients that are only interested in lab grown. So we have a filtered, report, here's lab grown, and this is it. We have clients that are interested in segmentation by type of retailer. So this is something that is easily built in and will allow, so in all of the different segmentations, type of jewelry, color, metal, type of stone, etc., type of retailer will be part of this. Especially since we're seeing that a lot of people are asking about it. So.
Okay. Interesting.
And Michelle, if I could add, one of the fundamental truths that we hold is that the individual data of any retailer will never be visible, right? So that's part of protecting a retailer's participation in this service. When you start getting into change, what's tough is, there aren't that many chains between 50 and 80,
Right.
between 80 and 120. So while it sounds great to be able to get really, really focused on an area, the reality is that you quickly become transparent to a single retailer, and we just can't do that.
No, that makes sense.
Our final question is, can you know where the retailers are located in the US? And I'm not quite sure if that refers to people, jewelers using Tenoris. I guess if they'll be able to see, trends by location.
Okay, I'll tackle that one. And again, not quite sure which way to go. So the service will offer a regional breakdown, and we'll have 6 regions in the US that are fairly typical. Kind of the point that we just pointed out, we can't really go too more refined than that because you start being transparent. I live in Vermont, and if you pick Vermont, there's just really not that many jewelers to begin with, so everybody can figure out who they are. So we'll have a regionality. To answer your question, where could you know where specifically the retailers are? Again, no, because that would give away you'd be able to figure out who they are. Would you be able to know how many retailers are in each of our 6 regions? Sure, because that gives you a perspective of the relative importance of each of those regions. So I hope that answered the question. That's a couple of different approaches to it. But again, key is we'll be able to provide very shortly a regional segmentation in the marketplace, so you can look at West Coast, East Coast versus the South. But the individual identity of a retailer would never be identified.
Okay, great. I think that answers that. And that does it for our questions. Thank you again to our guests, Chris and Edahn, for joining us today, and our editor, Michelle, for hosting. My next question will return next Wednesday, September 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will be interviewing Olivia Landau, CEO of The Clear Cut, and Jess Velke, digital marketer for May Jean Vintage Jewelry, about how they are mastering jewelry talk, aka jewelry TikTok. You can read more about it and register at nationaljeweler.com/webinars. Thank you again for joining us today, and please take care.
Thank you so much, Edahn and Chris. Thank you, Ashley. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.